somebody said, you need to think of it as a train set. I'm like, okay, explain that. So we can't really break a train set, you just change it and then you can put it back together again. And I went away with that, it's a train set, and all of a sudden I thought it's also not just a train set, it's my train set. And so if I don't play with it, and so for a long time it had been my dad's train set, so I had been running his train set, and all of a sudden I decided I was going to run my train set. And we sold the paper business, then we sold the textile business, then we sold the paper business, all probably a bit too late. We went from having a significant overdraft to having significant cash in the bank.
This is the Leeds Business Podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Fraser. I'm a business sounding board. Think somewhere between a business coach and a business mentor. If you're a business owner feeling lonely at the top, drop me an email. I can help mentor you. In this week's episode, we speak to Jamie Bentley, CEO of Stephenson Personal Care. Jamie tells us all about how it feels to take over as fifth generation in a family firm. All about selling in the States, looking, as he puts it, like a cross between Tim Nice-McDim and Hugh Grant. The feeling when landing your first $1 million deal, and how a brilliant train set analogy sparked his Eureka moment. Plus, Jamie tells us all about a great opportunity you can get MBA students to work on your new business idea. To make sure you never miss out on every episode of the Leeds Business Podcast, sign up to our priority list at www.leedsbusinesspodcast.com. Everyone that signs up gets a free gift to help their business. So, let's get into what is a really wide-ranging interview. My guest today is CEO of Stephenson's Personal Care, Jamie Bentley. Good morning, Jamie.
Phil, good morning. Nice to meet you.
Now, you are, am I right, you're fifth generation in the business, is that correct?
Yep, I'm fifth generation. It was started by my great-great-great-great-grandfather in the 1850s.
Okay, so let's give us all a history lesson on Stephenson's then. How did it all start?
Well, in really basic terms, we made soap to wash wool from 1856 to 1960 between Leeds and Liverpool, and we supplied all the textile mills and the wool processing people. Then in the 1960s, that all moved overseas, and my dad joined the business. He ended up actually selling it to a bigger business called Stephenson Group, and was given the challenge of, think of something which is a bit like washing grease and dirt off wool. And his idea was washing ink off newspaper in paper recycling. If you imagine a wool fibre and a paper fibre, they both got bits on them. And so you'll remember newspapers used to make your fingers grey, and our recycling chemistry stopped that happening. And so he transformed the business. That was the big moment. And then we've been in various businesses since then, all around using the technology of soap making that came from the wool trade in the north of England.
So if you're sort of washing ink off newsprint, you must be sort of one of the first green companies ever.
I think we were, and actually we've suffered a bit from that over the sort of past 10 years when sustainability has become this thing. It is part of what we do. I can't remember the number right now, but it's something like 300 million trees that we saved from being cut down. But at the time we did it, it was to wash ink off old paper because they needed to recycle it.
Right, okay. So you were there. You can claim to be there before the curve. That's very cool. It's very cool. So give us your background. Were you? I always get fascinated by this with family companies as to whether you're groomed to always eventually go into the company or whether you choose to. What's your story?
Quite the opposite. I was never pushed towards it. I was never academic at school. I was described as either as lazy or stupid at school, and then recall going for an IQ test, and they said, well, we can only conclude that he's actually lazy. Didn't do well at school. The business was based in Bradford. The board were all men in grey suits, and it was pretty old and industrial, and it wasn't for me. And I didn't do well at school. I went to art school. I went then and did an HND in business and financial management. And after that, left and worked for a travel company and worked as a mountain guide in the Alps and ended up running a small hotel in Turkey. And when you have a job like that, everybody says, what are you going to do when you get a proper job? And you're the one sat there thinking, I've got a proper job. You're the one paying to be here. And my stock answer was, I'm going to work in the chemicals industry. And it was just to really end the conversation. And when I came home from doing all that, there was a job in the newspaper advertised for marketing assistant for a company called Ellis and Everard, which was a chemical business. And I joined and I became, I think the title was marketing assistant, but it was really bag carrier and tea maker to a guy called Ray Wilkinson. And I followed him around the country for a year using his laptop because Excel had only just been invented and he couldn't really work it. And I learnt loads from him and then went on to their management development program, and that business became Univar. And all of a sudden I was in the chemical industry.
Okay. So what do you think you learnt from following Ray around for a year? What were the key things you picked up from him?
Probably learning how to watch a mentor. And it's not so much about what I learnt from him. It was what I learnt about the whole industry and his style with people. It was all around the sort of relationship building, because at the time, ICI, which is now mostly Ineos, but it was this giant company and we were distributors for them. So he had to have relationships, and I watched him build those relationships, maintain them. And I learned some of the commerciality around that. And then I watched other people in the business who were, some were fantastic, some weren't. And one of my key sort of learnings is to watch, mouth shut, eyes open and ears open, and watch and learn. And that was a great experience for me. And he left a big impact on me. And he was very old school. And it was in the transition from old school to new school.
Okay, so you moved up from bag carrier. What sort of things did you get involved in with your sort of next role?
I ended up being the guy running the commercials of a distribution centre in Suffolk. I would have been in my early 20s, and I had a lot of customers, a Vectra, a car phone, was doing about 50,000 miles a year, selling to businesses from ICI Paints, which was obviously very high tech, and they wanted combined buying and so on and so forth, to abattoirs, chicken farms, because we had Norfolk was my patch, so sold a lot of bleach. There was a lot of selling involved, but there was also, we had a very small team. There were 7 or 8 of us. We had a driver, a distribution person, an accounts person. And so I had to really interact with a small team. And it was really like running a tiny little chemical distribution business. And I learned a lot from it. But most of what I learned was around selling, which is what I loved.
That sounds like proper old school sales rep stuff. Get in the car, hang your jacket up in the back and drive around and knock on doors almost.
Not almost, it was. You tried to make as many appointments as you can, but you wanted to have as many customers you could just go and see. And I found that very difficult to do. And I worked out that as a rep, you could do 8 calls a day, maybe, but the trucks were doing 30 deliveries a day. So I abandoned my Vectra and sat in the passenger seat of one of the wagons, and I did all the selling from there. So I didn't use my company car. I just stayed with the drivers, and you'd go with an Arctic to a business. You'd work out whether the deal was good. You'd meet the buyer, and then the buyers weren't so corporate. So I could do 30 calls a day when all my colleagues were doing 8 calls a day, and that worked.
Fantastic. I love that. So this is my driver. He happens to be driving an Arctic lorry at the time.
Yeah. And the drivers, they know more about the customers than you'll ever know, because they talk to the guys on the loading dock, the engineers, and that's where you get the information, and it's where you build the loyalty too.
Yeah, no, that's great. You're really getting the info from the horse's mouth there, aren't you?
Yeah, and if you've got competition, they're the first people to tell you.
Yeah. So how long were you in that role, and where did that lead you to?
That I was in that role for about 3 years. I then got married, and I was, in inverted commas, headhunted by a larger chemical distribution business. But I was pretty clear all they wanted was my customer list. But I wasn't paid a lot, and they were going to pay me quite a lot more. So I came up to Yorkshire to talk to my dad about it. And in his house, they have a sort of drawing room that only gets used at Christmas time or bollockings, as I remember as a child. And so I'm talking to my dad about this, and he says, well, I think we should go in the drawing room. Oh, Christ, here we go. What's this all about? And he said, look, if you ever want to join our business, now is the moment, because, and this is a longer story, but the sectors we were in were all maturing, and we needed to go into the personal care industry. And he had the idea, and it was his idea, that if we can wash wool, we can wash paper. Can't be that different to washing people and washing hair. And he said, if you want to join, you can join as the salesperson into the personal care industry. We've got no customers, no products, no idea what we're doing. But if you want to join, that's it. And I said yes. And that was when I joined. And well, with hindsight, what a fantastic decision. It didn't feel like it quite at the time a few times, but it was a good decision.
Right. Okay. So in effect, he's given you a blank piece of paper, in effect, a startup, and I said, right, get on with it.
Yes, there was one key person in that. So the board was still made up of all the people that ran the industrial divisions, and we had paper, textiles, rubber, and silicones at the time. So that was the board. They were all called managing director of each division. The reality is they were all salesmen. And then my dad, who was chairman, the reality is he's a salesman, and the poor finance director trying to manage them all. And I joined as sales rep for the personal care products. And there was a guy called John Story, who's still in the business now, who joined a few months earlier as factory manager. And John had turned up with a sleeping bag on his first day at work and stayed in his office for 10 days. And then went back to my dad with a report on what he thought of the factory. And so John was my ally. John was a very capable chemist and a great doer. And we matched well. We did a double act for many, many years. And so in the scheme of mentors, he was a really key person for us and for me.
So just talk us through the emotion, the thought process of going to work for the family firm. What was going through your mind when you were in the drawing room waiting for your bollocking?
Not a lot. It just seemed a natural thing to do. It seemed like there was a real opportunity here for me to do something that wasn't, my godfather was the managing director of the textile business. I'd known him all my life. The head of HR, I'd known her all of my life. And this was a new thing I could do. So that was exciting. I didn't really rationalize all the issues that would come up. And I don't regret it for a moment. I spent probably the first 5 years thinking about just being the salesman for personal care products. And we built some products and John developed some products. So I was very much a sales rep within the family business. I was nowhere near running it. I was nowhere near the board. And then when that transition happened, there was a period of me being nominally in charge. John and I were made ultimately joint managing director. My dad was still chairman. So we carried on doing what we were doing for another 7 or 8 years. And then all of a sudden I had a Eureka moment and realized this was mine to deal with. And I think that if I'd made that decision or had that train of thought 10 years earlier, we'd be where we are now 10 years earlier. Okay,
before you tell us all about your Eureka moment, just talk us through how you developed the personal care offering, because like you said, there was nothing there. How did you approach that?
Well, if you imagine what we sell is the raw material. We don't sell any finished products. So what we sell is on truckloads in 1-ton bags. But if you think of it, instead of as soap as a candle, we would sell you the wax. So if you want to make a bar of soap, you have to buy soap base. If you want to make a candle, you buy wax. So this originally came out of a conversation when Anita Roddick had the body shop, in that she was buying shea butter from Ghana to help a community of women in Ghana. And as I understand it, if you're Ghanaian and you're a woman, you get sent out to collect shea nuts. And if you're a man, you sit at home and count shea nuts. And collecting them is a lot harder. So Anita Roddick wanted to support this. But when she got the shea butter back into the UK, it was in Hessian sacks. It was full of dirt. She couldn't use it. So all she was doing in the end was putting 1% in a lip balm. So the consumer wasn't getting the product they really wanted. The community wasn't really getting the sustained demand. And so we said, well, why don't we buy all the shea butter, stick it in a big tank, turn it into soap, filter it, and hey ho, your customer gets 20% shea butter. So that was one of the first examples. And again, right up there on the sustainability, really early doors on the whole thing, but it was a business opportunity. It wasn't about that. And then other products we developed, there was at the time a large company called Eureka who made these sorts of products, but they liked dealing with big businesses. So they were quite arrogant towards the smaller businesses, but we developed some products that were similar to theirs and went out and sold them. And I have a key memory of walking down Avenue of the Americas in Manhattan. I'm wearing a Marks and Spencer's pinstripe suit, a Marks and Spencer's polka dot tie, Austin Reed brogues, and I've got an Argos briefcase full of soap. And there's these 3 giant skyscrapers. And I remember standing there thinking, what on earth are you doing? How did you end up here selling to these people, or just selling soap? What kind of career plan was that? And I went into this building that belonged to Avon, went up to the 35th floor, whatever, in the big lift, came out, and there was a cliche, what now would be a normal office, but open plan, full of young people, full of beautiful people, full of bright people. And I presented to them the products that we had. And then I worked out that dressing up as a cross between Tim Nice but Dim and Hugh Grant and wandering around America kind of worked. And so for a while, John and I did that. And we built the business to several £1 million in a fairly short space of time through really just a lot of travel, a lot of graft, and a lot of his skill. But my skill was the selling. His skill was the delivering on the promises. And we'd regularly be in meetings, and I'd promise the earth. And in the taxi away from the meeting, I'd turn to John and go, can we do that? And he'd go, yeah, we can do that. And so that was really the beginning of it. And as that transitioned, and I remember clearly getting our first $1 million order. And I'd got a $1 million order from a company in Los Angeles that was at 40% gross margin. The other businesses were getting $100,000 orders from a paper mill in Wuhan at 20% margin. So all of a sudden on the board, I had a place. But the guys who were working their nuts off in pretty tough countries, in big factories, they didn't like it that much, or they sort of resented it. They were quite steeped in the tradition, and I was the new kid. I was the son of the boss. My customers were in New York, Los Angeles, Hong Kong. Theirs were in Wuhan, Hamburg, and Mongolia for a lot of the textile business. So that was an interesting transition.
Right. Just a couple of things you said there. It's interesting actually, and this will, if you're listening months ahead, it timestamps it slightly. Body Shop's just gone into administration this week. I mean, you mentioned Body Shop, but interestingly, I just want to talk about the £1 million sales order. How did that feel?
It was amazing. It was from a company called Primal Elements, and I got that order 22 years ago, and they are still a big customer. And I'm very close with the family that run it. I'd spent 2 years courting them, and their view was, why on earth would I buy these products from the UK? I'm in America. It felt amazing. The only problem was, it was in the days when Virgin would organize a car to pick you up and take you to the plane. And so we'd organized this car to pick us up, take us to the plane. We'd organized it to go from the customer. So we're in this boardroom, we get this massive order. And as soon as we got the order, I'm nudging John, like, let's get out of here. We've got the order. We don't want anything else bringing up. We don't want any other aggro. Get out of here. And I look at a reception, and they've sent this giant stretched limousine. I mean, it was enormous. And I'm like, God, the optics of that are terrible. Absolutely terrible. But they became great friends, and we offered very, very simple customer service, which was, if you have a problem, we come and see you. And I remember, dozens of times where we would get a phone call on a Thursday night, the soap's not setting, the soap's discolored because of, and these products were new, the soap's discoloring with a certain fragrance. And I'd ring John on the way home from work and say, I'll see you at Heathrow 5:30 tomorrow morning. We're going to see Primal. And when you're growing a new business, boy, do you protect those big customers in the early days. And you protect the big customers, you protect all the customers all the time. But when it's new business and you're trying to grow it, you do whatever needs to be done to keep it.
So was this point, the $1 million order, the 40% gross margin, is that the Eureka moment?
No, that was the moment when I think I realized that I now had credibility amongst the rest of the board. The Eureka moment probably came several years later when I was, John and I were joint managing director. My dad was still chairman. And there was a transition happening where I was essentially becoming CEO and John was becoming managing director. John was dealing with stuff back at base and I was more out and about. And the guys running the other industrial businesses were general managers. They weren't managing directors, but they were still salesmen. And I joined a business mentoring organization called YPO, which is essentially once a month you sit down with 8 like-minded people who run great businesses and you explain your business. And I went to a meeting and I explained my business, which I was extremely proud of. I was, lived in Knaresborough. In Knaresborough, I was doing pretty well. I was getting paid well. I ran this group of businesses. I didn't really make any money. Some years it made a lot of money in the paper industry in the early days, but the markets we were in had matured and we had lots of competition. And the brain power in the business was fundamentally around sales. So the strategy was generally sell more, which was also my strategy. I'm fundamentally a salesperson. So I presented this business to my mentoring group and I was very proud. I made it sound bigger than it was. All this group this and group that. 5 different P&Ls and so on. And they said, that is the most complicated loss-making business I've ever seen. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's taste. There's loads of things. We're in all sorts of things. And so we have this discussion and they were pretty brutal. And somebody said, you need to think of it as a train set. I'm like, okay, explain that. So we can't really break a train set. You just change it and then you can put it back together again. And I went away with that. It's a train set. And all of a sudden, I thought it's also not just a train set. It's my train set. And so if I don't play with it, and so for a long time, it had been my dad's train set. So I had been running his train set. And all of a sudden, I decided I was going to run my train set. And we sold the paper business. Then we sold the textile business. Then we sold the paper business, all probably a bit too late. We went from having a significant overdraft to having significant cash in the bank. And I think from that moment of selling those businesses, we lost 60% of our production overnight. And from that moment on, we've grown and grown and we've focused and we are now purely a personal care business. And that was the Eureka moment. Think of the business as a train set. Don't be frightened to change things. Bring in a lot more commercial and financial skill, engineering skill, invest in people, invest in culture. I didn't want to work in a top-down sort of environment, not because I don't think it's any good. I just think it's because I'm not any good at running one. So I made a conscious effort to surround myself with great people and learn how to manage people who are better than you. I think that was a key thing.
Let me just stop you there, Jamie, because there's loads of stuff you've covered there that I really want to unpack. I absolutely love the train set analogy. Absolutely fantastic. But before I do, I need to talk to everybody about the Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal. The Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal has 2 sides to it. My side to it is every week I bring you inspirational, motivational and fascinating business leaders like Jamie, totally free of charge. You, the listener or the watcher, have 2 parts to your side of the deal. Part number 1, I want you to recommend this podcast to one other person you believe will get a benefit from it. Part number 2, I want you to write a review either on the Apple Podcasts app, at podchaser.com, or give us a thumbs up on Spotify. Or if you're watching on YouTube, give us a wave, Jamie, to everybody who's watching on YouTube. There you go. If you're listening, Jamie's waving. If you're watching, you saw him wave. If you're on YouTube, give this episode a thumbs up and maybe even add a comment. So that's the Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal. Sound like a fair deal, Jamie?
It sounds like a very fair deal.
Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So you just threw in, oh, we sold this part of the business, we sold this part of the business, carry on. So just talk us through, just for those who haven't sold a business, and I'm actually going through the process now with an investment I've got, just talk us through the process of selling, particularly selling parts of a business rather than the whole business. That must be quite complicated. How did that process go?
Selling part of a business can be less complicated than selling all of it, because you aren't selling a corporate entity and you don't have the baggage around that from due diligence. So you're really selling a revenue stream, some IP or some know-how to somebody else who can take advantage of it. We sold the first business, the paper industry, without getting external advisors, and we probably didn't sell that as well as we could have done. The second business we sold was the rubber business, and we used a Leeds-based firm called Sentio as corporate finance advisors, and they were absolutely first class. And I think what you get out of having decent corporate finance advisors is you know how to sell the widget that you make, and you know how to make the widget that you make. You don't know how to sell a business, and you can't find the right buyers. You think you know exactly who the buyers are. We sold our rubber business to a huge American private equity setup, and we were heavily exposed to one customer in that business. We had 60% of our business was with Michelin tire manufacturers globally, and we thought that would frighten people off. The reality was this American organization wanted a strategic relationship with Michelin. So in the end, we got twice what I would have been delighted with for that business. And my learning from it is you need proper trusted finance advice, and the same with the corporate finance and the lawyers. And you can't beat that trust and that groundedness. You know, often people are tempted to go with the big firms and the big names, but when the deal gets to a crunch point, you want to ring the person who's got your best interest at heart and say, I don't know what I should do. Talk me through it. And that was massive in that circumstance. And then when we sold the textile business, we sold it to a Belgian guy who hated lawyers, hated accountants. And he said this, he was extremely vocal. I actually, in the first meeting I had with him, I left the meeting and refused to go for dinner with him because I thought he was wasting our time. And then he rang me and I was on holiday, and he made an offer and said, come to the office, we'll do the deal. Don't bring any lawyers or accountants. And I said, we can't, like this deal, you know, it's a multi-million-pound deal. I need lawyers and accountants. And they were negotiating over a ratchet if the business performed a certain way. And you could see him getting agitated. And I said, okay, forget this. You and I shake hands. If it does this, I get that. If it does that, I get that. And if it does that, I get that. And he stood up and he shook my hand and he turned to the lawyers and the accountants and was banging on, he is an industrialist, this is how it is done. It was amazing. And to be fair to the guy, there was no contract, he paid. So it was a big learning experience. And I think, you know, I learned more about the train set. You just learn from these people. And then that sort of led on to thinking more strategically about adding value into the business. So we worked on creating proper IP rather than know-how. And I think strategy, it's as much about what you don't do as it is about what you do. As a young sales guy, everybody that rang with an opportunity for some sort of soap, whatever it was, the answer was yes. So internally in the business, people were struggling to keep up with it. And I was probably highly irritating, going out, getting these opportunities. And I'm not a good finisher. You know, I'm a good ideas man. I'm a good salesman. I'm probably a half decent leader in terms of energizing people, but finishing it, I'm dreadful. And so when we learned to say, no, we're not doing all those things, we shut down those businesses. we spun one idea out that we had IP on, which was a product to make carbon dioxide stay in fizzy drinks and make it stay in the fizzy drinks longer. So the shelf life is extended, the taste is better. If you're using non-sugar sweeteners, it doesn't negatively affect the taste or the carbonation. And we spun that out and put it on our own business. And to get the business plan for that, we gave them everything we'd failed to do within the Stephenson business, gave to 5 MBA students at Manchester Business School and said, there is a concept and a product. What would you do with it? And they presented a business plan as part of their MBA. They had 3 months work on it. And I hired on the spot 3 out of the 5 students. And for a couple of years, they ran the business. And now it's a profitable business. We're in lots of big global brands, and that's a totally separate entity. But the idea came from MBA students who cost us, I think 3 months cost us 15,000 quid to have 5 geniuses who spoke 9 languages between them working on it, which otherwise it would have been our team who had shown for the last 8 years they couldn't do it.
I absolutely love that idea. Where did that idea come from, to actually take a concept to the MBA students?
It came from various people that I met within the YPO organisation. The Manchester Business School run various MBA courses, and they need business projects every year. And they've got to be, they have different ones, but the ones we were on, it has to be an international business issue. Like, how do I expand the market for, I don't know, widgets across Southeast Asia? And I think you pay a certain amount to give them the project, and then you pay a certain amount of expenses for them, but you go and pitch the idea to them. It's like Dragon's Den in reverse. So you've got to convince them you're good to work with, and you as the employer or the project sponsor have to put some time in and show them what the project is. But we've done 5, and 3 have been pretty much transformational to the business, and 2, they didn't land, but that's fine. And I think also it's part of this mentor, look at people, listen thing. You don't know what you don't know. These are bright people, very ambitious people from different backgrounds and different nationalities and different cultures. And it brings you a different perspective. We've got between 100 and 120 employees, half of them roughly in the factory, half of them in the office. Half of the ones in the office probably work on stuff like, accounts, engineering. So their influence on strategy is minimal. So you need people from the outside to come and help you, but you don't need a lot of consultants. You're better off having bright young people who have a fresh set of eyes, I think.
I love that. Great. And and that ties back into what you were saying about investing in people and as you said, the difficulty in managing people who are smarter / better than you. How do you cope with that?
All of these things, you meet people who are great leaders, great managing directors, great FDs. They weren't when they started. They just learned how to do it. And I think, again, you learn from watching other people, and you try very hard not to answer a question that you ask of your team. If you say, what do we do about this? You've got to listen to the answer. And it's very easy in a family business to think you know everything because you've been in it for a long time and your family's been in it a long time. And a lot of people look to you for the answer. And I think it's giving them the space to do it, giving them the room to fail, and not fearing failure. Fail fast. Great idea. Let's try it. And that's the beauty of a private business is, however big it is, you've still got a board that can actually make a decision like right now. And decisions need making right now. And you implement them. And if they're not working, you change them. And then you realize who the really good people are. They respect you for giving them space to do what they do best. And then it works.
Great. That's absolutely right. And one of the key things, and I had to do this in my business, was that when I brought a number 2 in, you've got to give them the space to fail. You've got to just grit your teeth and say, no, don't do that. You've just got to go, let you fail, let you learn, and then we'll go again.
Yeah, I've just brought in, I promoted somebody that's worked for me for 25 years. He's been on this whole journey. He is now managing director. I've hired an external chairman. She's been MD of similar companies. And I am trying very hard to sort of step back into a shareholder role, because I've done 25 years of this and I know it needs fresh eyes. It needs new drive. And I love it. I mean, I love it to bits. I haven't built it, but I feel like I've been part of building it with everybody else. And I want it to continue. So my big challenge now is learn how to be a shareholder of what I hope is a family investment, and I can incentivize and motivate the senior team. And, if I can do that, it can go on without me, because I will become stale in the not too distant future. I just know that people do.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Now, every week on the Leeds Business Podcast, we ask our guests to give us a how-to. So, Jamie, over to you. Tell us what your how-to is, and then tell us what we should learn.
Bear in mind, I have absolutely no idea how to ask a question on how you should do something. All I can talk from is my own experience, and my experience is around joining a family business and working for my dad. I think the biggest thing is learning that if you are in a position where you are taking over a family business, you have to respect your predecessor enormously, and they know what they're doing. They've built the business. You've got to ask them for help. And if you're lucky, as I was, that not only creates a great business, but it creates an amazing experience to work, together. In my case, me and my dad, we went all over the world together, and I'd learned from him, and he gave me, and I think this is important to the dads or the mums who are in the leadership roles, he gave me the space to fail and the space to change things and the space to try things. The mistake I made was taking too much time to work out, this is my train set. So if I was taking over, and you're not taking over, you're just joining a family business. You're not taking it over. You only take it over when you've earned the stripes. But have the conversation about how that transition might work in the future, and don't push it. Don't expect somebody to give you all the shares early because you're working really hard. And think of it as a train set, and really work together and be open about your vulnerabilities as the next generation. And hopefully the previous generation can then be open about their vulnerabilities. It's their life's work, and you might be about to screw it up. And then the train set analogy, I think, is very useful.
Great stuff. It's great stuff. So a great how-to, though, brief how-to as to, if you're taking over, and I suppose if you're taking over a business you've acquired as well, some of that's relevant as well. If you buy a business or you bolt a business on, all those learnings are relevant to that as well.
I think if you're buying a business or you're bolting on a business, it's to get into the detail, understand the shop floor level of it, the people that do the doing. And I admire, I have a friend who was a chief exec of a big public company and turned up in the corporate headquarters to take his role as chief exec, and immediately got driven to one of the retail outlets and spent a couple of weeks in a retail outlet before he even bothered to talk to his senior team. And I thought that was fascinating. Just if you're buying it, you've got to understand it. And I think if you're buying it, you want to understand it, and you want to understand the culture and influence the culture can really be influenced much better up than down. Once it's done upwards, you can push culture down, but you've got to build it from the bottom up.
Yeah. Great stuff. Great stuff. Now, we also ask our guests to give us a shout out for another Leeds business. But before you do your shout out, Jamie, I've got a few shout outs of my own. Now, last week I attended a networking event, and we gave away a load of Leeds Business Podcast biscuits produced by the girls at the Biscuitery. If you want to find out about them, they're on episode 5. As part of me giving out biscuits, I asked people to take selfies and stick them on LinkedIn in exchange for a shout out on the podcast. So I got so many, I'm going to have to do half of them today and half of them next week. So the following shout outs to Mike Hall, MJH Art Studio, Mike produces bespoke corporate art for your HQ. Do you need some new corporate art for your HQ, Jamie? Give Mike a shout.
No, but I'll keep Mike's name.
Sally Benson of Limelight PR. Her aim is to create a happy workplace attitude. Rebecca Dalzell, also in the HR side, she's my internal recruiter. They do recruitment through subscription, so quite a new business model on that one. Martha Phillips, Source Marketing Communications. They produce performance-led marketing comms. And Katrina Lewis Interiors, bespoke luxury interiors. There'll be links to all of them in the show notes below. Thank you to all of you for taking selfies of my Leeds Business Podcast biscuits. And I'll hand over to you, Jamie, for your shout out.
So my shout out isn't to a business, it's to an organisation called the Hunslet Club, which I'm on the board of. And it was established in 1940 in South Leeds. And it's basically a youth club at its very simple level. But it has 2,500 members. And it's had 67,000 visits this year. And these are kids who get the opportunity to do sports, welding, cooking, get mentoring, get social engagement. And we're trying to work with Leeds Council to build this place into something that's really fantastic for the future. And the work they do is phenomenal. And so hopefully the next year or so, we will get some funding from the council, but that will need to be match funded by Leeds businesses. And I would be very happy to take anybody there, and we will need to get money to build some amazing facilities for kids in Leeds. And the people that run that and the kids that go are just phenomenal. So it's an enormous asset to the city.
Brilliant. Great stuff. There will be a link in the show notes below, as well as links to Jamie. So if you want to contact Jamie about that and give him some support, that's brilliant. Jamie Bentley, it has been an absolute fascinating 3/4 of an hour. What a brilliant business story and some fantastic learnings. And I'm now going to go and play with my train set. Thanks ever so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you found it interesting, inspiring, and of use. To make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, please subscribe to the show. Go on. Do it now. Do it now before you go off and do something else. Thank you. Much appreciated. Oh, and don't forget our fair deal. See you next week.